Have you ever dealt with anxiety? I think this is something that we all inherently deal with, but I think this is my theory that the reason we have anxiety is because we choose it. So hear me out. We all know what anxiety feels like. Anxiety is something that's very common and prevalent in our lives. Maybe it's when you have anxiety, you can't sleep, and so you stay up all night. Or maybe your heart's pounding really fast and you have heart issues. Or maybe you have little nervous tics like scrunching your toes in your shoes. Or maybe you bite your fingernails like I do. You look at my fingers and you see a bunch of little fleshly nubs because I only have half of the fingernail I should because I bite them. But here's the thing. I choose it all. I choose all of the anxiety that I have. It's a result of the actions that I choose. I choose to worry about the things that I worry about. I chose to get married young. Me and my wife, we got married when we were 21. We were both in college. I chose to be married to her despite knowing the financial problems that we probably have once getting married as a result of getting married young. So I chose the anxiety associated and the fear of being married young, associated with being married young. So if you get what I'm getting at, if you're picking up what I'm putting down, anxiety, fear, and depression is a result of the choices that we make. As a man, I've always kind of just bottled my feelings. And you can, obviously there's implications and consequences of that. But when you get married, that's something that you have to choose to communicate, is your feelings about things. So, anyways, as a man, I've always bottled up my feelings. And the only way that people could know my anxiety, or the only way that my wife can know about my anxiety or my fear or whatever that I might be experiencing, the only way that she can know is if I tell her. But I ain't going to talk about it, you know what I mean? And I imagine some of you are like that as well. But here's the thing. That is a result of me choosing not to. So because I bottle my feelings, the feelings that I fail to communicate, which makes it worse for me, it's a result of my actions, a result of my choices. So, have any of you ever studied body language? I think that we all know what body language is and subtle signs of body language without studying it. Like when I stand here tapping my toes like this, right? You know that I'm impatient, or rather that I might be ready to go. So you can pick up on that body language. But if you study body language, it's really interesting. So I've always been somebody that likes to watch people. If you ever watch people, it's actually really interesting. If you're not a people watcher, highly recommend it. Just don't do it in a weird way, of course. But I say that because everybody has their own little mannerisms and stuff like that. And things that just make them tick. And so when you study a person's mannerisms, when you study a person's ticks, you begin to understand them. Over the years, I've found it pretty interesting to learn. But here's one example that we can all relate to of anxiety. So imagine yourself in a public restroom, right? And you're in a stall, and the next thing you know, somebody comes in. Like, you immediately stop what you're doing, right? You tense up a little bit. You don't make a sound. You don't, if you breathe really quiet. You definitely don't talk, right? Unless you're just one of those people, then don't be one of those people. But you stop what you're doing, right, when somebody walks in. And so you wait. I know I'm not the only one, so don't think that I am. I know somebody else out there does this. But anyways, so I know that's probably a bad example, so here's a better example, okay, of anxiety. So imagine this, Friday afternoon. You just finished your lunch break, you're about to go to work, and you have a meeting. So you go to the meeting, you aren't expecting to prepare or present anything, and so you're just going because you're just supposed to sit there just to be there. Like, you're a body to be there, you know what I mean? And so you get there, you just ate a real big, nice sized turkey club sandwich, turkey, cheese, all that fun stuff. You got it, it's gonna be really good. You finish it all, it's a whole foot long, you eat chips with it, cookie with it, a nice solid sweet tea, or if you're not from the South, maybe you got, some pop or whatever. Anyways, you drank something that you really enjoyed with it, and now you're feeling full. So you sit down, you kind of just plop down at your meeting, and what do? You just sit there, you're letting it settle, and then all of a sudden your boss looks at you and said, all right, you ready to present? Immediately you're like, huh? You get confused, your heart starts pounding a little bit, and then on top of that, I imagine your thoughts are like, what am I supposed to present? Am I supposed to present today? What am I supposed to do? And then your mind starts going from, oh my gosh, I'm not prepared. This is a pretty big board meeting. Why? I didn't know I was supposed to present anything. If I don't present anything and if I do a bad job, then maybe I'll get fired. If I get fired, I won't be able to pay the bills. If I don't pay the bills, I'm going to lose my house. If I lose my house, then I won't be able to provide for my family. You see the train of logic that's happening there. So your anxiety, because of your lack of preparedness, ended up resulting in fear. Told you it'd be a little bit better of an example. So that's something that we can all relate to, that anxiety. Our anxiety shifted from nervousness to fear. So now what? Ever since I was a kid, I'd prefer to sit back and learn from other people's mistakes. Being the youngest sibling, I'd oftentimes look at my older siblings and learn from their mistakes. That way my parents wouldn't get mad at me for the same things that my older siblings did. But, like I said, I've always enjoyed learning from other people's mistakes. And so I'll watch strangers. And again, going back to people watching, I'll watch people, learn from their mistakes. If I'm, hiking on a trail and I'm looking at people in front of me and they trip on a log or like they trip on like a root, I'm going to make sure that I look for that root so that I don't stumble on it. You know what I mean? So I've always thought it beneficial to look at people and learn from their mistakes. As a Christian, the Bible is the ultimate authority. And so I think that we can look at the Bible, we can look at the characters in the Bible. Just as I look at people on that hiking trail in front of me, I think that I can look at them, I can look at people in the Bible, and I can learn from their mistakes as well. I think that's why a lot of the stories in the Bible are there, so that we can learn about the history, we can learn about their lives, and we can also apply it to our lives so we don't have to make the same mistakes. But it's pretty cool to people watch. I read about people in the Bible and I imagine scenes in my head. And in fact, in Genesis chapter 32, it talks about Jacob and Esau. But just a few chapters forward in Genesis chapter 27, it talks about how Jacob and Esau, and it kind of like introduces them in the Bible for us. But if you aren't familiar with the story of Jacob and Esau, this is the one that most people are familiar with. It's the story of how Jacob stole Esau's birthright. So, if you aren't familiar with the story, so basically Jacob is the younger brother. They have a father, his name's Isaac. There's two sons. The oldest son is Esau. The youngest son is Jacob. So, Esau has always been a daddy's boy. But Jacob, the youngest son, was always a mama's boy. So Esau, being the oldest son, he was also, in that time and culture, supposed to have the birthrights. So he was supposed to receive his father's land, money, livestock, servants, all that. That's what he's supposed to inherit. So Esau, again, being the daddy's boy, he was the hunter of the family. So he went out, he tried to go get some game for food, stuff like that. And he ended up coming back empty-handed. And so Jacob saw this as an opportunity to manipulate his brother. And so Esau had been gone for quite a while, and he hadn't eaten the entire time because except, maybe like he foraged a little bit of stuff, but he couldn't find any game to eat. And so anyways, he comes back home, he's absolutely famished, he's starving. And so his brother Jacob, he sees this and he says, "I tell you what, you're so hungry, I'll make you your favorite bowl of soup, your favorite bowl of stew, if you give me your birthright." And so Esau, this is how you know how hungry he was. He gave up his birthright. He gave up his inheritance for a singular bowl of stew. So anyways, Esau begins eating his soup. And then, because in his mind, I imagine, this is how I imagine, because my older brother and I, older brother is super smart, right? And so as kids, he would always be one step ahead of me in my train of thought. And so, for example, in the Jacob and Esau story, Esau knew that he could tell his little brother, "Yeah, sure, give me that bowl of stew." But he knew that he would have to get the permission from his father. And so Esau probably was thinking, okay, there's no way Jacob's going to get that permission from our father, so it's fine. I'll just get the bowl of stew, and it won't be my fault. It'll be Dad's fault, right? Anyways, so Jacob, he conspires with his mom, and ended up, in a long story short, ends up tricking his dad. And so, because Esau was a very hairy man, so basically Jacob just put on some fur and made his dad, because his dad was blind, make him think that it was Esau. Anyways, so he ended up tricking his dad. He manipulated his dad into giving him his older brother's birthrights. So the birthrights that were naturally supposed to be his older brother's. So not only did he manipulate and lie to his brother, or rather he manipulated his brother, but he also manipulated and lied to his dad. So shortly after robbing Esau, again, Jacob went and lied to the father, ultimately convincing him to give Jacob the blessings that were supposed to be Esau's. And then Esau returned to find out what Jacob had done, because again, Esau probably didn't expect Jacob to actually trick their dad. And so when Esau found out that Jacob had tricked his dad, it kind of gets interesting here. So he talks to his dad, he says, and this I'm going to read it to you, he says, "Oh, Father, what about me?" Talking to his dad. "What about me? Bless me too," he begged in Genesis chapter 27, verse 34. And then to make things worse, his dad responded with this. He says, I've made Jacob your master and have declared that all of his brothers will be his servants. I have guaranteed him an abundance of grain and wine, and what is left for me to give you, my son? That's in 27 verse 37. So what does that mean? That basically just means that the dad gave the youngest son, Jacob, he gave Jacob the right to be the master over Esau. Because Esau grew up thinking, oh, I'm going to be the master over my brothers. I'm going to be the master over Jacob. I'm going to have the money, the wives, the livestock. Now everything's changed because not only did Esau sell his birthright or give up his birthright through manipulation, but now the dad blessed it. So now Esau is rightfully mad at this point, right? Because everything that he was ever told he was going to have has been taken from him by his younger brother of all people. And so it gets interesting because in verse 41, Esau says that he's plotting to kill Jacob. Out of fear, Jacob ran away. So I imagine in this moment, Jacob is feeling really anxious, fearful, worried, right? Imaginably, because his older brother is trying to kill him. So he runs away. And man to man here, man to woman here, Jacob deserved to feel guilty. Because again, he lied to his brother, he manipulated his brother, and then he lied to his dad. He deserved to feel the way that he felt because it was a result of his actions. So likewise, I think that when we feel anxiety, fear, and depression, it is a result of our choices that we feel that way. So, moving on in that story, some time passes and Jacob ends up having a heart-to-heart with God. And in fact, God in a dream, he encounters God in a dream, where God confirmed the blessings to Jacob that his father had given him. So then we fast forward to Genesis chapter 32, where Jacob is a changed man. He relies on God, he talks with God, he converses with God, and he relies on God's promises for his life for multiple things. Jacob has gone off, raised his own flock, raised his own family, has his own servants. He's wealthy beyond measure because of the blessings that his father and God gave him. So the only difference between Jacob in Genesis chapter 27 and the Jacob in Genesis chapter 32 is that Jacob had an encounter with God that changed him. So God rid Jacob of his fear and anxiety of his brother up until this point. Likewise, he can rid you of yours as well. In Isaiah chapter 41 verse 10, I'll read it for you. It says, "Do not be afraid, for I am with you. Don't be discouraged, for I am your God. I will strengthen you and help you. I will hold you up with my victorious right hand." Speaking from experience, it's easy to want to take things in your own hands. I think oftentimes, especially as a man, as being the head of the household, as a husband, I want to try to control my environment as best as possible so that I can basically control all of the variables so that nothing surprises me. I think a lot of you are probably the same way. Whether you're the head of the household or not, you try to have a control of your life. That way nothing can surprise you. That way, because you have a plan, right? You have a plan and you want to carry out that plan. And you know the saying, man plans and God laughs, right? But anyways, so because I want to control the things of my environment, I begin to rely on my own understanding and not God's. I am a man with limited knowledge, but God is a God with unlimited knowledge. So would you rather rely on your limited knowledge, or would you rather rely on God's unlimited knowledge? Because God is all-knowing, right? And so when we have full trust in God and lean not on our own understanding, as Proverbs chapter 3 tells us to do, says, lean not on your own understanding, we are surrendering our decapitating doubts stemming from our limited knowledge, because we have doubts and we have anxiety because we have limited knowledge. So we are surrendering our decapitating doubts stemming from that limited knowledge and relying on His unlimited knowledge. When we face our fears and surrender them to God, we release our bondage. Our chains are breaking. Our chains are broken. And we become who God has called us to be. Going back to the story of Jacob, though. So God changed him between 27 and chapter 32. God changed him. God has broken his chains of fear and freed him to become who God has willed him to be. We are about to witness something interesting in this chapter, though, in chapter 32, because Jacob is about to encounter Esau for the first time since he betrayed his brother. So this is their first time encountering one another. How do you think that they're going to be feeling about that? I imagine, based off of what we just read, Esau is probably fuming. He is mad. I bet you he's trying to find his brother, try to kill him. Jacob, thinking that's probably how his brother is thinking. I imagine Jacob is going to be feeling fearful, anxious, worried, depressed. I think that's logical for us to assume that based off of the context of what we just read. But anyway, since he has begun to rely on God, God has taken his chains of fear and freed him, right? Which allows for this interesting response, which we'll talk about in just a second when he encounters Esau. So this is what Jacob did. In Genesis chapter 32, verse 4, he goes on to say that Jacob sent his servants to Esau to give him a message that read, "Humble greetings from your servant Jacob." So keep in mind that the birthright that was supposed to be Esau's has now been given to Jacob, which makes Jacob the master over Esau. So Esau is supposed to serve under Jacob. So keep that in mind. So then the servants go tell Esau that, and the servants end up coming back to Jacob. You know what they say? They say, "Master, your brother's got an army with him, and he's got about 400 soldiers." All right, so at this point, I imagine Jacob is probably really scared because he knows how mad Esau was at him just quite a few chapters ago, which I'm not quite so sure how many years that was, but we know it's a good length of time because he's cultivated all this livestock and wives. And so we know that Esau is coming with his army of 400 men, so we can safely conclude how anxious and fearful Jacob is because of that. So when we face adversity, anxiety, fear, we ought to greet it with a humble spirit. We need to decrease our pride and increase in our faith. I say that because of how Jacob responds here. So he thought that Esau was going to come to kill him and his family and take all his blessings. So he cried out to God. This is where I get that from. He cried out to God. And he says, "Oh Lord, please rescue me from the hand of my brother Esau. I'm afraid that he's coming to attack me along with my wives and children, but you promised me I will surely treat you kindly, and I will multiply your descendants until they become as numerous as the sands along the seashore, too many to count." That's Genesis chapter 32, verse 11 through 12. So when you are in your pit of despair, your pit of anxiety, your pit of fear, depression, remember God's promises, just as Jacob did here. He decreased his doubt by increasing his faith, and he remembered God's promises for his life. And that is what helped get rid of his anxiety and his fear. Okay, so to keep going on, this is what Jacob did. He then divided up all of his livestock, all of everything that he owns, his cattle, his sheep, his donkeys, all that. And he assigned some servants to different groups of the livestock. And so he told them to go offer them as a gift to Esau. So what does that mean? Just to put it in different words. So Jacob divvied up all of his belongings, and he put a couple of servants to this group of livestock, this group of livestock, this group of livestock. And so then he told them to go to Esau. And so it was one at a time that they were supposed to go to Esau to offer themselves as a gift. So this gift was Jacob walking in humility to his brother, showing himself as a humble servant. So I think Jacob was responding out of fear for life at this point because he was sending all of this livestock as gifts to his brother, saying like, "Look, please forgive me, you know." Nonetheless, if a person or a group of people are causing your anxiety, then it can't hurt to bribe them with gifts, right? Just don't do that with a cop, though. Just don't bribe a cop. That's not going to end up good for you. But anyway, so in all seriousness, though, Jacob prepared himself for the worst. That's how he dealt with the fear and anxiety. He prepared. In Genesis chapter 33, verses 1 through 3, Jacob is watching Esau and his army march upon Jacob's camp. So he's seeing his brother's army infiltrate his camp. When Esau finally arrives, Jacob bows before him 7 times. 7 times. So if you know a little bit about Asian culture, you know that they bow. But here's something interesting about bowing is, remember how I said that Jacob was supposed to be the master of Esau? Not only is Jacob showing himself as a sign of respect to Esau, bowing, He is also because, again, he has an army, right? Esau does. So I imagine he has swords, spears, and all that. So when Jacob is bowing to his brother, he is enabling his brother to chop his head off. He is saying, look, I'm yours. He is offering himself in humility to his brother. Funny, considering how, according to who received the birthright, Jacob did. Jacob is supposed to be the one to be receiving the vows, not giving them. So anyways, this is Jacob's last attempt at peace. He's asking for forgiveness by bowing. Then in verse 4 it says, Esau saw his brother, ran to him, hugged him, and they cried together. It seems that God had been working in Esau's life just as much as he'd been working on Jacob's heart. God softened both of their hearts for one another. I've always enjoyed watching people. You can learn a lot from watching people. In this case, when dealing with fear, anxiety, worry, and distress, even if self-inflicted, we need to approach it the same way that Jacob did. We must become humble in spirit, decreasing our pride and increasing our faith in God. We must remember God's promises in this times of trial and impending doom. Remembering God's promises for our life is actually our calm reassurance, because God will never back down from his word. God is good, perfect, just, and loving, and he is going to fulfill his promises for you. And if you don't know any of what God has promised you, well, there's a lot of promises that he offers to his people of Israel, but also to his children. And so now, because Jesus came and died for us, we now have the opportunity of being saved. So we now have the opportunity to be a child of God if we so choose. And so if you choose to be a child of God, then a realm of promises are available to you now. If you don't know any promises, I'm just going to recommend that you start with Psalms 91. Start with verse 1 and read through verse 16. It's the entire chapter. And it's basically a chapter of promises for God will make you once you're a child of God. But verse 1, it says, for those who live under the shelter of the Most High will find rest under the shadow of the Almighty. So, I say that. There's a lot of promises that God has given us, and I'll talk about another one here in a minute. But on top of all that, on top of remembering God's promises, on top of remembering to humble ourselves and to surrender our pride and to walk in humility, by decreasing our pride and increasing our faith, we need to prepare. That's what Jacob did. He prepared. And just to enunciate a little bit better, he prepared. We need to prepare as well. Prepare for the worst while not falling into the temptation of relying on ourselves more than we rely on God. We need to trust more fully in God rather than relying in our ability to control our environment, because we can't control our environment. We have that limited knowledge, as I was telling you about earlier. Because of our limited knowledge, we don't know everything. We can't plan for everything. But God, with his unlimited knowledge, unimaginable knowledge, it would be wiser for us to follow his understanding and to follow his will rather than our own. Last but not least, we must be ready to forgive. That's what Jacob did. That's what Esau did. So I say all that to say this. I deserve this. You deserve this. Anxiety, fear, depression. We deserve it because we choose it. It is a direct result of the choices that we make. But like Jacob, I now have God who can fight my battles. And if you are a child of God, you now have God who can fight your battles as well. He takes my chains of anxiety, fear, and distress, and he frees me so that I can fulfill God's proper will for my life, thus resulting in receiving God's promises. While I may deserve the chains that I seem to constantly put myself in, Jesus has taken them up on the cross and freed me from those chains. You see, sin is binding. When we sin, we're bound in chains. But because of what Jesus did on the cross for us some 2,000 years ago, we are free from the punishment of those sins. Romans chapter 6 says, for the wage of sin is death. but the free gift of Christ is everlasting. Woo! The weight of sin is death. So for every sin that we commit, we are deserving of death. 1 John chapter 1 says that if you claim you are without sin, then you're lying to yourself. Romans chapter 1 also states, or sorry, not Romans, 1 John chapter 1, the last reference and this reference. 1 John chapter 1 also states that for all those who walk in the light, which is being a child of God, how do you become there? You believe in Jesus. But for all who walk in the light, all of your cleanse have been cleansed. Hello. All of your sins have been cleansed. That's right. So, I say all that to say this. Jesus, his death and resurrection has broken every chain of sin, every bondage of sin that is imaginable for those who have walked in light, for those who choose to believe and profess with their mouth that Jesus has died and resurrected. So are you going to continue to remain wrapped in your bondage? Or are you going to allow God to break every chain? What are you going to do? You now have a choice right now. If you're saved, congratulations. If you're not saved, you now have a choice. All too often I blame myself. As a husband, a man, I tend to blame myself for everything and allow the weight of the world to weigh me down. I allow it to stack up against me. Let it go. You have no reason to feel anxiety. You have no reason to feel depressed. You have no reason to feel fearful. Why? Because God gives us fear as a reminder that we are not in control, but He is. He gives us a fear as a reminder to rely on Him. You see, the pain that we've been feeling can't compare to the joy that's coming. That goes for your happiness. It can't compare to the joy that's coming. That goes for your sadness, your anxiety. It can't compare to the joy that's coming. For the children of God, we have hope because whatever happens in this life, it doesn't matter because as a child of God, we know where we're going when we die. To be absent of the body is to be present with the Lord. In the blink of an eye, we will be in the presence of the Father as soon as we die. But to be honest, if you're not saved, the only hope that you have is that you find Christ. That you profess with your mouth and believe in your heart that then you will be saved. Believe wholeheartedly. John 3:16, for God so loved the world that He gave His one and only begotten Son, so that whosoever believes in Him shall not perish, but will have everlasting life. You have a choice. So what are you going to do? Let your chains of bondage and sin go. Let Jesus break them for you. There is no hopeless soul, because even if you aren't saved, you have hope in the fact that Jesus can save you. You too can have your weights lifted, so give it to God. And Matthew chapter 11, verse 28, it says, come to me all who are weary, and I will give you rest. Godspeed, everybody.